Hello and welcome to Spy Hard's podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur. And Scott, I don't like horseplay.
Nay, you don't.
Thank you. Good follow-up there.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I've had my Weetabix today. And we've got a great film to talk about and a great guest joining us, which we're going to get to in just a moment. But it's been a little while since we've inducted a new Spy Hard Die Hard, Cam.
Yes, that's right, yes.
So how would, as a sort of preamble, how would one go about becoming one?
Well, you can achieve this glorious
Mythical.
status.
Mythical.
By leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and writing a review telling the world your thoughts on the Spy Hards podcast. We will then read that review on the air and give you your top secret Spy Hards Die Hards nickname.
And I'll give you a hint for us picking the ones to read out. The funnier or the nicer, the better. Or if they have insults about Cam.
Okay, fair.
They jump to the top of the pack. As long as it's 5 stars as well, you can say whatever you'd like. But let's have some fun with it, folks. But speaking of having some fun with it, we've got a really nice one from Mr. Michael Fenimore on the Australian Apple podcasts. And it's one of the loveliest reviews I've ever read. So here it goes. 5 stars, where spies come in to nest. When it comes to diversity, humor, depth of research, or even the odd arched eyebrow raise, Sir Rog style, these fine fellas Agent Scott and Cam the Provocateur have the drop on all things espionage, an A to Z of glorious and sometimes inglorious celluloid spy jinx that stimulates the cinema senses and tickles the funny bones. If you thought the world of filmic cloak and dagger was Bond, Hitchcock and Smiley, think again, as these double agents peel back the layers of sabotage and supremacy to soar where eagles only dare. So tune your dial north by northwest as the Knights of the Secret Service invite you to the circus and indulge you in their 5-star podcast royale from Michael Fenimore with love.
Oh, that's incredible.
That's a 5-star review. I'm reviewing the review as 5 stars.
Yeah, exactly. And I love anything that starts working in the titles of other movies, North by Northwest, and referencing, obviously, the Bond stuff. And, oh, beautiful. That's incredibly well done, Michael. Thank you so much.
I mean, I would take a star off because there was no trench coat reference in there.
That's true. A trench coat reference will get you, I don't even know what that's going to get you. It's beyond your wildest dreams.
It could get you anywhere, literally. Directly into our hearts.
Trench coat is the new Condor Man.
I don't know. Condor Man has a very very special place in my heart. I don't think I'll ever out-Condor the Condor Man.
No, that's true. You'll never top that.
I'm still chasing that interview. To this day. I still send the odd email asking if he'll do the show.
He's not joking, folks. I see the emails that go out.
Please come on.
The number of emails that have gone to Michael Crawford trying to get interviews to talk about Condor Man. You may question, hey, they talked to Barbara Carrera about Condor Man. When are they going to talk to Michael Crawford? Rest easy. Scott is trying really hard, harder than any other interview we land on this show.
Harder than I think any person on this planet to interview Michael Crawford. I am probably the person that is trying the hardest currently at this time.
Yeah, sadly, you were trying really hard for a long time to get Dabney Coleman as well, and he's since passed on, so that's not going to happen. But that was another one we tried really hard for.
Yeah. Oh, Dabney. What a guy. But thank you, Michael, for leaving that fabulous 5-star review. People, you've seen the gauntlet thrown down by Michael. The benchmark is set. Fenimore forevermore. But we can't let Michael go without celebrating and giving him a wonderful code name.
Well, Michael, I am incredibly impressed with that review, and so I want to give you a proper title, one that really sums up my complete appreciation, as well as Scott's, for that very fun, witty review. So I think, in honor of this week's film, you are our man in Australia.
I mean, we won't even attempt Australian accents. We are that thankful for that review, that we won't badmouth Australia by putting on Aussie accents. And I can do a pretty good Aussie accent. But Michael, thank you. I hope you enjoy your new code name. You are officially our man in Australia, and I'm a big Men at Work fan, so I love Australia by proxy, I suppose. But anyway, we've got a great film to talk about. Let's get to it, Cam. Let's hit the review. Okay, Cam, the temperature is rising. We're heading down to Cuba. But before we get there, we need to bring in our guest to the toilet stall with us to have this discreet meeting all about this week's film. So joining us on the show, spy author extraordinaire, Mr. Lachlan Page. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hi, Scott and Cam. Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh,
It's a pleasure to be here.
boom. You're going to fit in well.
It's a pleasure to have you here. You know, it's been a long time in the works, this one. You know, we've been talking online for feels like years now, but it was about finding the right film that sort of meshed in with the books that you've been writing as well. A little bit of like connective tissue there, which I think is quite nice. But we'll get into the books in a second, but let's take it back a step and talk about spy movies. Obviously, you've gone to write spy novels yourself, but where has the sort of love of spy fiction come from for you?
I think for me, it's always been around travel. So those, spy movies often have those exotic international locations, and that's something that for me, I've always been drawn towards. So, growing up seeing the Bond movies, and he's kind of traipsing around the world, that kind of really drew it in for me. I think also I've always been a bit of a like kind of international politics kind of fan, or I've always been interested in that, and that obviously the plots of spy novels always
Hmm.
contain those kinds of issues or international kind of issues. And I guess probably when I was like just finishing high school, it was when Casino Royale came out, and so that had a big impact because that was kind of like a reinvented Bond. So that kind of did it for me as well. And probably one other thing, this might be similar to you guys. I used to play GoldenEye on Nintendo 64.
Yep.
That was a classic game, so that was one of my favorite games. So that might have, subconsciously done it as well.
Well, okay. Who is your multiplayer character?
Ooh, I think I always liked. I think was it Valentine?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think I used to be him.
Okay.
He was a bit shorter, I think, than some of them.
Right.
Harder to shoot, maybe a bit wider though, so that might have been easier.
I was always Siberian Special Forces every time.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We had a no odd job rule though.
Okay.
I think every family had the no odd job rule because my family had something similar.
Uh huh.
Like it felt like cheating if odd job was on the screen.
It did, yeah, because you couldn't hit him half the time because he would go
Yeah.
underneath the bullets. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I don't have any connective tissue. I can't think of a way of segueing into my next question with that, so I'll just leave that hanging.
Yeah. Break it clean.
Let us know, folks. What is your GoldenEye character? I'm curious to hear. Mine is Xenia.
Okay. Yep. Yep.
Hmm.
You see,
Yeah.
you guys went for like prominent name characters. I was like, I want anonymity. I want obscurity.
I think it meshes more with you.
Yeah. You're blending with the snow as well.
Yeah, like
Mhm.
Cam just tends to blend in with the scenery. He picks the Siberian guard who also blends in with the scenery.
I'm real wallpaper is really what I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're a really good spy, though.
True.
It's
True.
a perk for us, at least, anyway, being exceedingly bland. But speaking of something that isn't exceedingly bland, spy movies. You mentioned that sort of connection there with how you kind of got into it. But what are some of your favorite spy movies?
I think probably, well, definitely Casino Royale, one of my all-time favorite Bond movies, I think.
Hmm.
Even though it's a newer one, I know people tend to maybe go towards the Connery films or older films, but I'm a Casino Royale fan. Also, I do like, we were chatting about this a little bit before, Spy Game. That was kind of
Hmm.
another movie that came out at that same time. So that's probably another favorite. I like the kind of gritty realism of that, or the kind of, slower paced uh, slower pacing of that film, how it shows the different handlers and agents and sub-agents and those types of things. Um, I think another movie, I guess it's a spy movie, Syriana, which had um,
Yeah.
Hmm.
George Clooney. That was kind of a bit like a spy adjacent, I guess, but that was something that I think I really liked, that kind of realism. And again, it was that kind of probably of my period when I was at university or graduating high school, and there was kind of lots of contemporary issues. Probably one more that I would say is I really like the original Bond, Doctor No. I just love the kind of old school charm of that, and that opening Bond scene where he's at the casino, which is the first introduction to Bond in the movie world. That's probably another one.
I feel like Doctor No was not considered that cool when I was young and watching Bond movies,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
has over time amassed, I think, a real fandom around it. And that I'm a huge fan of Doctor No. It's one of my most like rewatched movies in my age period now.
Yeah. And when you look back at, I think some of those kind of scenes, like in the mountain and things, they kind of really set the tone, I think, for a lot of those other action movies that came later, or those other kind of, movies within that genre. A little bit cheesy in parts, and it was the first movie, so, but yeah, I enjoyed it.
Well, I mentioned some of the books that you've written at the start when we started talking, but cue us up a little bit here, Lachlan. What made you want to get into writing spy fiction and actually telling those stories as opposed to just sort of enjoying them on the big screen?
Hmm. I think, well, I've always enjoyed reading kind of travel novels, spy novels, as well as nonfiction. And I guess I don't really if there's anything that really kind of threw me into it, or kind of one thing. But whenever I'd read a novel, there'd always be maybe an aspect of it that I thought, if I were writing this, I'd do this differently, or I'd have that character. Or another thing I always found is sometimes spy novels are on the slower kind of realistic end, let's say like John le Carre, or they're on the maybe
Sure.
kind of military thriller end, like Jack Carr or something like that. And
Hmm.
there's everything in between. And I always felt I was kind of in between those two genres, and it's tricky to find something that balances those two really well. So I kind of thought, perhaps I'll write something that I haven't found in the market, or something that I would kind of read rather than what's already out there.
Well, I quite like that you sort of looked at the world of spy books and thought, I can do it better. Because I like to think the listeners hear this show and think, I could do it better for anything that we talk about. So I like that sort of symmetry we have going on here. And I was doing my due diligence on you, looking you up before you came into this. And I
Yep.
love the bio that's online for you. It says, Lachlan has lived in Colombia, South Korea, Europe, and Nicaragua. He has worked as a volcano hiking guide, a Red Cross volunteer, a marketing analyst, language teacher, university lecturer, and an extra in a Russian TV series.
Yes, that's all true. I can verify.
What a resume! What a resume! Yeah, you have the
Yeah.
life of a spy. You are getting around doing all these jobs. I wonder if you are actually truly the spy here.
Well, that's what a lot of my friends have said that, but unfortunately, the reality is a little bit different, a lot more boring. And as exciting as that sounds, I think it was just from my traveling. So it was kind of one of those traveler things. You get into weird situations, and things like the extra in a Russian TV series just came from being in a backpackers hostel at the right time, and they kind of just a lot of funny stories that I collected along the way, and weird kind
Mm.
of jobs that I did.
That might be the case, but I can at least say, right now we're recording over 3 different continents. You're coming to us live from down under. So, at least for today, you will be our man in Sydney.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I like to hear that trope. The our man in.
Yeah, I think I'm our man in London. Cam is our man in Vancouver.
Sure.
Sure. Or our man in BC. What do you prefer?
Probably Vancouver sounds better.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're queuing it up a little bit here. We're bringing it all together. Why don't I throw the question over to you, Cam? What are we talking about this week?
We are talking about Our Man in Havana from 1959, directed by Carol Reed and starring Alec Guinness.
I was saying this off air before we hit go. Strangely, and this is this is our 4th year now. Just celebrated our 4th birthday. This is the first time we're talking about Alec Guinness. This might even be the first time we're talking about Carol Reed.
Yeah, we have not tackled Carol Reed yet. We will in the future, for sure, big time.
Mhm.
But yeah, this is a first.
Yeah, so it's a lot of tick boxes happening here, folks. People have been waiting for a long time, I'm sure, for Alec Guinness to appear, for Carol Reed to appear. Have no fear, they are here. I'm looking forward to talking about it. A lot of rhyming going on. It's clearly late in the evening for Scott. But if you've never seen Our Man in Havana, here is your synopsis. Our Man in Havana. A murderously funny story, magnificently cast, and marvelously made.
What? They're like complimenting themselves on the casting?
It's positive reinforcement. They're thinking they're a good film before they start.
Sure, I mean, they're handing out an Oscar this year for Best Casting. It's going to be a new category going forward.
Okay.
They were ahead of the curve. They were like, people, pay attention to our casting back in 1959.
Hey, I think the casting of this film is actually one of its strong points, so they're not wrong.
Yeah, they aren't wrong.
But here's the rest. Jim Wormold is an expatriate Englishman living in pre-revolutionary Havana with his teenage daughter Millie. He owns a vacuum cleaner shop, but isn't very successful, so he accepts an offer from Hawthorne of the British Secret Service to recruit a network of agents in Cuba.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really solid setup because that's really just like the first 15 minutes, but it sounds intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, shoving the vacuum cleaner bit in there as well.
Hmm?
Like, you've got me intrigued. I mean, this film is so quirky and distinct
Mm-hmm.
that I don't think you need to work too hard to put the synopsis together, because you just got to put a few of these words in, and it's like, yeah, this sounds completely different to anything we've ever spoken about.
Totally.
But let's take it back a step for a second, because this is my first experience with this film, so I haven't got to belabor that point. But I'll throw it to you, Lachlan, because you suggested this film to us. So what's your sort of initial experience with Our Man in Havana, and why is it maybe an important film for you?
I think, well, my first experience was through the book. So while I was living in Colombia, I planned a trip to Cuba, and so I like to usually read some kind of book that's similar to the country I'm going to. So I read the book, and obviously I knew about it because of that "Our Man in Vancouver, Our Man in London" type
Mm-hmm.
slogan that gets thrown around a lot by journalists, and I read it because of that. After I watched the film straight away, just before I went, and just something about I think the exotic location in Havana. So at the time, or actually now, Cuba is quite an exotic location, and it's a little bit closed off as one of the last communist countries in the
Mm-hmm.
world. So I think a lot of people are very interested in that. I was as well, because it was based in Latin America. That also kind of held a big connection for me, having that interest in Latin America. Um, Definitely because it's Graham Greene, it features a lot of hapless expats drinking in dingy bars in foreign locales, and I kind of like that that kind of scene. I think also because it had a comedic aspect,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a very if we think at the film, it is has that kind of dry humor running through it, and that kind of satirical element that I think is really appeals to me, as I kind of like comedy and that type of thing. So that's something as well.
It's a very British film.
It is, yeah.
Like, this form of comedy, I do not think would translate quite as well to North America. Maybe I'm wrong.
No,
I don't know. Cam?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak for myself. I thought it clicked, but I don't know that it was a, blockbuster in North American theaters back in the day.
Sure. Oh, that actually would be. I'd be curious to hear about that if anyone has any information on that, which we'll get into the behind the scenes in a minute. But Cam, I don't know if you've ever seen Our Man in Havana, but do you have any history with at least Carol Reed?
Yeah, I've seen the Third Man is
Mm-hmm.
the Carol Reed film that is obviously a big deal. But I've seen a number of his films because he directed Oliver,
Yep.
the big musical that won the Oscar for Best Picture in the '60s. So he's a director that I know his name. I've seen several of his films, but he's a little bit of a journeyman in that you go through his filmography, it's pretty vast. The guy has directed a lot of stuff, and a lot of those movies just aren't remembered at all. But when he suddenly hits, there's like next to no one better.
Yeah. I've got a lot of questions about Carol Reed because I've seen Oliver, so that was definitely my first in with Carol Reed. But I mean, was it always a choice that that he shot in black and white? Was that just something of his style?
For the third man?
Well, this third man and Oliver is all black and white, if I remember correctly.
No, Oliver's in color. That was like a
Oh, is it?
big, like, yeah, lavish musical.
I must have just seen like a black and white copy, or I must just be misconstrued. Maybe actually, I'm sorry, I forgot. Everyone just uses black and white televisions here in England. We're still stuck in the 1950s.
That's right. That, or you were like watching an old 1915 silent version of Oliver Twist.
I was actually covered in soot from cleaning a chimney whilst watching it. Yeah, I didn't wipe it off my face. I'm sorry. Yeah,
You were the artful dodger for the day.
I was. I love to pick a pocket or two. Well, let's get into the backstory then of our man in Havana. How did he get to Havana? We've already had a little bit of mention of the Graham Greene novel there, but Cam, I'll bat it over to you once again.
Well, Lachlan set it up very well with Graham Greene, wrote the novel that this is, of course, adapted from. And it was published in 1958. And Graham Greene, for those who don't know, English writer and journalist, written a lot of acclaimed novels, among them Brighton Rock, The Ministry of Fear, which we tackled on the show, The Quiet American, which we will tackle on the show, The Third Man, which we'll tackle on the show, and Confidential Agent, which we also previously tackled on the show. So he has a pretty thorough understanding of the espionage world. And he started working in the British film industry around the mid-30s. He got a story credit on the 1937 film The Green Cockatoo, but wasn't really... He has a ton of credits, but it's largely for his work being adapted. But he did work in screenwriting, and that Green Cockatoo example is one, but he did work in TV as well, occasionally. But in 1948, he had two films that he wrote the screenplays for. He did an adaptation of his novel Brighton Rock, which was a Richard Attenborough vehicle. And he also adapted his short story The Fall Idol for Carol Reed. Carol Reed directed that film. And ultimately, Graham Greene earned an Oscar nomination for the screenplay for The Fall Idol, which he lost to Joseph Mankiewicz, who wrote A Letter to Three Wives that year, which is actually a very good melodrama about a group of women who have an anonymous letter confessing adultery, and they can't figure out whose husband it is that wrote the letter. Very good film, worth checking out. Very different than the movie we're going to talk about today, but nonetheless.
If I remember correctly, just a recent film we tackled, Allied, the Robert Zemeckis film, I think Brad Pitt was reading Brighton Rock during that film.
You're right. Yeah, good pull. I totally forgot about that.
Wow.
Wow. Okay.
Someone's had his Weetabix today.
That's right. And so the next year after the Fall Idol, him and Carol Reed reunited to do The Third Man, which was obviously a huge deal. And then he reteamed with Reed in 1959 for this film. And the story of this film was actually inspired by Graham Greene's own experiences. He was, working in espionage in World War II, and while serving in Portugal, he encountered German spies who were sending fictional reports home in order to keep their paychecks coming. And so that was sort of thing that really grabbed him. And he originally considered setting the story in pre-war Estonia and centering it on an Englishman who was trying to keep his wife happy. But British censors at the time, he was initially pitching this as a screenplay, not a novel. British censors were not too big on the idea and thought it was derogatory to the British Secret Service. And so instead he moved it to 1950s Havana and swapped a wife for a daughter and published it as a novel.
They, of course, thought the concept of having a happy wife was impossible, too. Just a ludicrous... Why am I coming up with wife jokes so early
I don't
in the
know.
show? Like, what's the deal with wives? Oh, jeez.
I just flew in and boy, are my arms tired. Yeah.
I was going to say that Our Man in Havana has a lot better ring than Our Man in Tallinn or Our Man in Estonia.
That is a good point, yes. I wonder if he would have stuck with that title or if it would have had a completely different title if it's in Estonia.
Our Man in Tallinn, that could sell, though. But Our Man in Estonia, not so much. But Havana has kind of a musical nature to it. I like that more.
Totally. So basically, after he'd been, turned away by British censors from turning it into a screenplay, the book becomes a big hit, and then they want to turn it into a movie. So ultimately, it all wound up being made anyway.
Yeah.
So because the novel was popular, it drew a lot of potential buyers, including Alfred Hitchcock, who really wanted to make this movie around the point of Vertigo. And ultimately walked away because Greene was asking £50,000 for the rights, and that was too rich for Hitchcock's blood. But he ended up turning around and selling the rights to Carol Reed for far less because they were friends, and he had confidence that Reed would not change the novel too much.
Whenever someone mentions an amount of money, especially in this behind the scenes stuff, and this is a question more for people listening, but also to you too. Do you ever get that sort of Austin Powers music playing in your head when it's like £50,000, da, 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 like it's some sort of massive amount of money? Like, I'm pretty sure I could buy the rights to this film if I went back in time.
If you go back in time, but then to do the conversion on that one over time, I don't know that you could.
No, probably. Oh, are you saying if I time traveled, my money would decrease over time?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
That's how time travel works, folks.
We're going off of like a perversion of Back to the Future time travel rules here.
Sure. I mean, to be fair, if I went back in time to when this film was made with £50,000 in my pocket, I'm not sure my first act would be to buy the film rights to Our Man in Havana.
No, you want to buy the rights to Bond. That makes you a lot more money.
Yeah, well, if you put it in my hands, though, is that the same?
Oh, that's true. It's like every movie is like Casino Royale 67.
Yeah, like everything is a rollicking riot.
Just a total fever dream.
Oh my god!
Of ineptitude.
I wouldn't make it out the 60s.
No. So Carol Reed, English director, and started out in the 1930s in second unit before moving into the big seat in 1935 with the romance It Happened in Paris, starring Robert Wyler. And that was a case where he was actually stepping in to replace a director. He gets his first real major credit that same year with a sea adventure called Midshipman Easy. But it takes him a while to kind of find his footing. And if you go through his early filmography, it's a little bit like Hitchcock, where it's someone who you know is incredibly talented, but they're cranking out B movies and a lot of things that have very low IMDb scores. And he really does kind of bounce around for a while. In 1940, though, he makes Night Train to Munich, which is a spy film that has a real fandom around it. Mm-hmm. In 47, he does the James Mason Irish drama called Odd Man Out that was very acclaimed. But it really is The Third Man that solidifies him as like a true master. And this movie was his follow-up to the World War II tugboat drama, The Key, starring William Holden and Sophia Loren.
Is that spelled Quay?
It's not.
Oh.
That was what really threw me. It is Key, and it is actually referencing an actual key in the movie.
Oh. I feel that's a missed opportunity there.
I mean, if you're going to have a tugboat drama,
yeah. Have a bit of wordplay. Have some lightness to it. Jeez.
Yeah.
Oh,
well. Carol Reed would make several films that would be celebrated, but it wasn't until Oliver that, he wins like the Best Director Oscar, and it's kind of like, okay, now you're part of the legendary Hollywood players of this time.
But you compare him to Alfred Hitchcock, who you mentioned the name a few times. I don't think they're in the same hemisphere as one another.
No, more that when you look at Alfred Hitchcock's early work, there's a lot of movies that people have never really referenced, like Waltzes in Vienna.
Secret Agent.
No, that one's like he's starting to click at that point. He's making really weird things before that.
Okay.
Yeah. So a bit of on the casting. Noel Coward, who's in this film, was originally up for Harry Lime in The Third Man, and didn't get that role, obviously. It went to Orson Welles, and this was a bit of a consolation prize, him getting the role in this film.
I'm going to throw this question out to you two.
Mm-hmm.
Could Noel Coward play Harry Lime in The Third Man and it be good?
What do you think, Lachlan?
I don't think so. I mean, he seems reasonably old in Our Man in Havana, and I guess Harry Lime's kind of a bit of a younger, fitter guy in some ways. And I guess I think Third Man was about 10 or 12 years earlier than Our Man in Havana, so he might have been a bit younger, but I can't see it. I think he plays the character in Our Man in Havana, kind of a bumbling British spy bureaucrat, a lot better, I think, than, Harry Lime.
I think the problem is, like, Harry Lime, when he appears in The Third Man and it's Orson Welles, the whole audience pops for that. Like, they're like, oh my God, it's Orson Welles. Whereas, like, Nothing at all against Noel Coward. I don't know that they have the same kind of reaction.
Are you comparing to Orson Welles turning up in The Third Man to like Captain America picking up Thor's hammer or something like that in theaters? People were like jumping up and down and crying.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. That was the comparison I always meant.
Yeah, that's exactly. You were. It was Avengers Endgame again. That's all it was.
Exactly.
Actually, Third Man was the original Avengers Endgame.
Another casting story. So, going back to Confidential Agent, a movie we talked about in the past.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The star of that film, Lauren Bacall, was the first choice
Uh-huh.
to play the secretary character in this film. But she was busy, so they chose Maureen O'Hara instead.
I love that line. She was busy.
Yeah, she's done other things.
I'm doing my hair. Sorry, I can't be in your film. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Maybe she was like, this did not work out well for me when I did a Graham Greene adaptation in the past, so I'm going to skip this one.
Well, she was miscast in that one too, to be fair.
Really badly. It's one of the worst miscastings I think you and I have come across in all the episodes we've done.
Yeah, pitched completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then lastly, the studio wanted Jean Seberg to play Alec Guinness's daughter in this, but she was busy shooting the French noir Breathless for Jean-Luc Godard, a film that would become very iconic and change the face of cinema.
There you go.
Yeah, worked out well for her. And now the political situation in Cuba was a little complicated for shooting there. So before production, just before production, Fidel Castro's communist revolution overthrew the U.S.-supported government. And so it was a very unstable area. But Graham Greene had a relationship with Fidel Castro and was like, don't worry, guys. Things are going to go real smoothly.
Oh, Cassie, we're good friends.
We're going to have a cigar, and don't worry. We're just going to settle all this. But
all good.
While I think it was pretty easy for most of the cast, there was a lot of script changes they wanted made that Cuba was demanding.
Right.
And so they wanted to go through it. There was a lot of censors jumping in and having a lot of notes. That's ultimately why they have that opening prologue saying it's set before the revolution.
Right.
So that they could get away with a lot of details because they weren't exactly thrilled about it being sort of this hotbed of, espionage and all that sort of thing after the revolution.
And sort of bumbling police captains and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So, and even like Ernie Kovacs, who plays the police chief in this, was forced to shave his beard. He'd actually grown a beard for the role, but they made him shave it because at that point, beards were associated with rebel leaders.
Oh, okay. I think having the mustache was a better look.
Yeah, it totally worked.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the actress who played the daughter, Jo Morrow, bonded with Che Guevara when she was there shooting. And they bonded over their Irish ancestry because he had an Irish grandmother. And so that was kind of the point of connection between these two. So I thought that was really interesting.
I did not know that.
It just really sets like the time and place this film was made. We're like, oh, they were just hanging out with Fidel Castro.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Che Guevara's there, just kicking it up. Yep, sure.
Yeah.
Why not?
Okay.
There's actually some photos online you can find of Fidel Castro with Alec Guinness and Maureen O'Hara as well. If you Google it, there's quite a few photos of them because I believe Castro visited the set for about an hour or something. I'm not sure if you found that out in the research, but he visited the set and shook hands with some of the cast and chatted to them.
I'll be putting this up online this week. Don't worry. Wow.
There were rumors at the time that Fidel Castro was trying to woo Maureen O'Hara, and it seems like that was largely all just rumor that was heavily played up in the press.
There's the photo of the three of them together. I actually would track that he was trying to woo her because she's making one of those smiles that I can't really translate in an audio podcast. But you know when someone's fake smiling?
Oh, yeah. I see it from you every single time you pop online.
Whenever I see your face, Cameron.
That's right. The cast seemed to have a great time, with the exception of Alec Guinness. Alec Guinness was a big star at this point, and him and Carol Reed didn't really get along so well, because Carol Reed told Alec Guinness, "We don't want any of your character acting. Play it straight. Don't act." which really frustrated Alec Guinness. So he really felt unsure with even how to play the character scene to scene.
Right.
And so when you kind of read behind the scenes anecdotes, it's all these people talking about what a great time they had with each other, and Alec Guinness being quite frustrated.
I think that actually comes through in the performance. It's interesting you say that. Now it's sort of coming together for me there because we'll get into it a little bit more perhaps, but what a frustrating note to get from your director. You're in a spy comedy. Don't play it comedic.
Well, like Alec Guinness had become a big star, and I think of the movie The Lady Killers, where he's like incredible, but that's like a very like broadly comedic performance. And I wonder if they were just like they understood the tone they were going for, and they were worried he would go big, so they were trying to rein him in, but that just made him frustrated.
Well, I will add, and I can hear people screaming at me at home, one of the best comedians of all time is Leslie Nielsen, and the reason he's so successful is that he played it straight.
Yeah, very true.
So maybe it was a very good note, and I'm an idiot.
Maybe both.
Or one.
Exactly. So the box office financials on this one are not easy to find. That's not a big surprise when you talk about movies of this era. It was also split in its release between years. So it was released in the UK in 59, but North America in 1960.
Oh.
The one note I could find was they said it was a moneymaker in the UK. So it seemed to be a hit.
I could definitely buy that. I think I said it earlier, but it's definitely a British sensibility when it comes to comedy, or I would read it as such.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think based on the novel as well, I think the novel was, reasonably well known, and that would have drawn, I think, a bit of a crowd as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to think of how Alec Guinness was a name at this point, because Bridge on the River Kwai would have come out.
Yep.
And been a pretty big hit in North America as well. So, yeah, I think it did just fine. It just wasn't like one of those runaway smashes that is going to be as noteworthy when you're going through research. For example, the top three for this year, and I'm reading the 1959 year because that's when it was released first in the UK.
Sure.
Number one was Ben-Hur. Everyone knows the financials on Ben-Hur because it was such a massive smash. But, you also had The Shaggy Dog and Some Like It Hot. All three movies that have had a long legacy and were known to be very successful.
I've not seen The Shaggy Dog out of those three.
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
I'm sure the novelty was much more exciting when, people were living in 1959.
It wasn't too rough?
So anyways, this movie got a Directors Guild nomination for Carol Reed, which he lost to Billy Wilder for The Apartment. It was also nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Motion Picture Comedy, which it also lost to The Apartment.
At least it got some noms, I suppose?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, The Apartment is one of the greatest films of all time, so I don't feel that this was a case of Havana being slighted. I think things worked out just fine. One thing I came across, though, that was an interesting note was they said that I would think this would have been, a lot of the research I was reading would have been from the 2000s, and they were saying at that point, this movie was actually one of the most obscure Carol Reed films because it had not had a DVD release.
Right.
And so I wonder if that was kind of the reason that for a while it wasn't one that popped up too much, whereas now in the age of streaming, anyone can rent it.
And I will also point out, as it stands at time of recording, this is also available entirely for free on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which probably speaks more to the rights situation of this film more than anything else.
I wish I had realized that before plopping down $5 on Amazon. Thank you, Scott.
I don't care if you spend money, Cam. I want to save everyone else some money.
I'm fine. I will send my money to, Alec Guinness and Carol Reed's estates.
I hope that helps you sleep tonight.
Hopefully.
Well, there you go, folks. That's the background. That's how we got to our man in Havana. But let's talk about the film. Let's pour ourselves a daiquiri, as he likes to pronounce it, and really drink it in. Lachlan, I'm going to go to you first. I want to hear your thoughts about the film in 2024, many years removed from its original release.
Okay, so I guess the main thing I think is, if we're looking at other spy films, it's the antithesis of a Bond film. So the characters are very kind of Bond character, I guess. He's
Hmm.
kind of bumbling, doesn't really know what he's doing. He is not betting lots of women and drinking martinis. I guess the daiquiris, come in there. So that's probably one thing I think of. And another thing I noticed is it has kind of all those really the kind of tradecraft, the spycraft, old school
Hmm.
spycraft. Like that has the book codes. That's what a key to the movie
Yeah.
that they really feature. They kind of make the joke about secret ink or kind of invisible ink. And they have the code numbers, and all the code numbers are kind of one of the key things as well, which, some of them have the 00 in it. So, so that kind of
Little double
links
O.
to, yeah, to the double
Hmm.
O's. Um, so that's kind of an interesting aspect. But also, I think perhaps it's like a movie of its age because the whole they talk about the atomic weapons and the vacuum cleaner is called the atomic pile.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it's Dr. Hasselbacher who says we're living in a nuclear age or an atomic age
Yep.
in the film, and I think that kind of played into it. That kind of maybe fear of nuclear weapons after Second World War and then during the Cold War.
And also the competing vacuum salesman, he works for like new cleaners,
Yeah,
and the way it's kind of spelled is like nuclear. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. Ah, yes, that's right. And also, I think that because of that time in the 50s, I'm guessing it's like the post-war boom, and so that's when you see all those old commercials for like fridges and washing machines and all this new technology that was available. And I think the vacuum cleaners kind of fit in with that in some ways of that time.
That has to be the era of like the traveling vacuum cleaner salesman, right?
I'm sure.
Oh yeah, you definitely get a vacuum cleaner salesman at that point. I mean, I can't imagine someone coming to my door to sell me a Hoover now.
That'd be amazing if that was your side job.
It's all a side job. That's all I've got. Someone please buy a vacuum cleaner from me.
Yeah, I was going to say one more thing that I think it was interesting with Cam mentioning about the history and thinking of the history now that um, between when the book was written, the film was just filmed only a few months later, and then the revolution occurred, like we mentioned, and that all happened in the space of just a few years of
Hmm.
book, movie, and then revolution occurring. So it was kind of like a pretty big world event happening. So I think looking back on it, it was quite amazing. It happened at that time.
I have to wonder too if this was happening now and they were making this movie. If you had a revolution going on in a shooting location, I don't think they would go there. Like,
No.
I think it was kind of bold of this production to be like, you know what? Apparently, Graham Greene says everything's cool with Castro, so let's head on over. I think nowadays, not a chance. They are just going to fake it somewhere like they do in Die Another Day.
Yeah.
There's entire films that have scrapped plots because of like what's happening in the Ukraine right now.
Yeah, yeah. Was it Operation
Mm.
Fortune? They had to do some fixes.
Yeah. And like wasn't it one of the Marvel shows had a whole Ukrainian thing? Or was it more to do with like the COVID plot? Maybe.
There was a show that was like heavily revised. It was Falcon and Winter Soldier because of COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. So like they would rather pivot away from things. So it's actually quite interesting that like especially when this film came out, it must have felt very relevant.
I would have to think so. Yeah, I mean,
I think
I would
so. Yeah.
imagine that would be a big part of the marketing, right?
Mm.
Well, not according to the synopsis I read.
Well,
And I think because it was filmed in Havana as well, like we said, I think Die Another Day was, the Bond film was set in Havana but filmed in Spain. I think
Hmm.
No Time to Die as well. The most recent Bond film was meant to be in Cuba, but it was actually filmed, I think, in the Pinewood Studios in
Yeah.
London, whereas this was actually shot in Havana. So it's quite rare, I think, to find those movies that are actually shot in Cuba. And even now, I think shooting there might be some difficulties depending on what film it is and what the situation is politically at any given time there.
oh yeah, and I was thinking about it too. You were mentioning how it's fun how this movie is sort of playing with spy tropes and the kind of things we would really see exploited in the Bond films. I think this movie was made at the perfect time though, because it has this very like dry sensibility,
Hmm.
and it's not playing it over the top. Whereas I think if this movie comes out in the wake of the Bond success, in the 60s, I think it's going to be more big and extravagant and be something more like, I don't know, Scott, The Liquidator, which we tackled on the show. Like, it wouldn't be this kind of like subdued, very cerebral comedy. It would be something where they'd be like going much bigger.
Well, the film has almost two lives to it. Like, there is a satirical sort of Doctor Strangelove kind of story going on about the farcical nature of being a spy. But on the other side, there is actually quite a dark story about a man who gets pulled into a world he's clearly not ready for, and then makes it much worse for himself and has to defend himself. And it's actually that's really like the split in the middle of the film, really, where it goes from one to the other. And I think I'll jump in on that point, because that's really the thing I wanted to talk about in sort of what I thought of the film. I was not on board for this film for the first 40 minutes or so.
Right.
Like, I laughed at a few gags. I found a few situational things funny, and Alec Guinness is a good lead. It pulls me in. But, like, I didn't care about, like, the machinations with his daughter and the police captain, and, he's sending fake drawings home, la-di-da. But when the chickens came home to roost, I think that's what the saying is. Something came home to roost. Something's roosting in my house. I don't know. Please get it out. I don't know how. When something came home to roost, or whatever that saying is, then the heat turned up, and actually it felt like there was something happening in the film. And by the end, when there's like the sort of shootout in the street and things like that, like I was on the edge of my seat. Like, it really pulled me in at that point. And I think it's a real shame that first bit just didn't catch for me. I watched it twice to see if it was different on the second viewing, but no. It's very, like, laid back in the first 40 minutes, and then the tension starts to ramp up as you get to the second half. And that's, I think, is a real shame, but I really do enjoy that second half, so that there is enough for me to enjoy that second visit.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely felt like a split. I noticed that even when I was taking notes.
Yeah.
And that I was really enjoying. I think I was more positive on the first half, but it was like more, it almost felt like gentle comedy.
Yeah.
You know, him going to the country club and bumbling around and arranging these meetings in bathrooms. And once again, going back to how many movies is it where we have spy meetings in bathrooms? It's so common. But I thought that was really fun. But it was like, okay, is that all there is? Like, I thought there was a little more of a hook to this. But then you get to that second half, and when you have him, like, shooting that guy down, and it's like, it's pretty cold-blooded. When you see Alec Guinness transition from this kind of well-meaning, genial, kind of, you know, hapless guy, just trying to create basically these stories to get money to make his daughter happy.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay, you know, this is fun, this is cute. And then you, like, turn that switch by the end, and you're like, this is a guy who, when you really think about it, when you consider what he's going through, the amount of complications piling up, there is a very noticeable lack of panic in him. He's aware of it. He definitely seems to be like, oh, this is getting worse and worse. But he almost becomes like a sociopath at a certain point. Like, he doesn't seem to be genuinely reacting the way most humans would. And so then when you have that moment of him pulling the gun and shooting the guy in the street, he doesn't show any sign of, like, true remorse. It's like he seems to be more capable of it than you might have thought given the first half of the movie.
So you're saying he's a sociopath?
I'm not saying that they would have written him that way in that time period, because I don't know that they had a classification for that. But it does kind of play that way nowadays.
It's interesting you say that, because I think it's actually one of the things I grated against is the fact that much as there were stakes, it didn't feel like they were pressing on Alec Guinness. Like, he was able to just sort of make all these lies up and get away with it in the end. But that sort of harkens to things like you mentioned, The Liquidator. I also wrote down Burn after reading.
Me too.
Yeah, well, like, it doesn't matter in the end. Everything it's all silly. This is all very silly. And so, like, I actually had a problem with that ending in Burn After Reading, and I have a kind of a problem with the ending of this too. But, like, what's the alternative? Is the alternative that he gets put into prison, or he's gunned down by someone in Cuba? Like, that's not a fun ending for a comedy. So I guess what we got is kind of the comedy ending.
Yeah, I would say so. And I think I'll just, quickly pivot to my thoughts. I somewhat gave them there, but I really was on board for kind of the quirky vibe of this movie. It looks beautiful.
Great.
I love what they do with their locations, but there's nothing like this movie. And I did love the way it was playing around with old school espionage, but also doing something that felt very unique. And yeah, I was writing down burn after reading as well and underlining it, and that this feels like an early take on that kind of material. And I would not be surprised if the Coen brothers were fans of it. And there was just moments of Alec Guinness throughout where he would just like raise his eyebrows, reacting to things that were happening. But it was always like, is that it? Like, I was always kind of on the edge of my seat because of Alec Guinness's performance. And it's interesting that he seemed to have a somewhat frustrating time making the movie because it's a very controlled performance. And it's one that I think kind of pulls you in. And he's incredibly sympathetic, but you walk away from the movie going, why was he sympathetic? Like, he seemed to have no real remorse. And most people, Scott, if you had put yourself in a similar web of lies as this man,
Okay.
I'd be getting panicky Zoom calls from you being like, what should I do? What should I do? He seems so...
Why would I come to you with that? Why would I implicate myself with you? You'd be the
Well-
first person to call the police and dob me in.
That's very true. I would actually. And I'd be like, is there a reward? Because I will take it.
There isn't? I'll tell you anyway.
You know, when you have like Maureen O'Hara showing up as a secretary and, you know, like the radio man, like most people would be absolutely freaking out. And to me, that becomes like the interesting part, like the character study sort of buried underneath the farce of this movie.
Well, I think he has no self-awareness.
Yeah.
I think that's a good part of it because like, even when those people turn up, he's just kind of like, okay. And then just sort of makes the lie work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he really understands the consequences of his actions too much. So when he gets home and sort of bumbles his way into being let off, he's like, okay, great.
And he doesn't come across like, you know, a guy who's like really bored and looking for adventure either.
No, he really wants to sell you that vacuum cleaner.
He does. He seems very
Yes.
happy in the vacuum shop.
Yeah. And you mentioned like some of his face acting. There's a scene where one of his supposed agents, of these fake agents that he has assembled, is just dropped outside of his vacuum cleaner shop. And he takes the guy's like face mask off and then recognizes him and shoves it back into his face, and he opens his eyes really wide. And that's the only reaction you really get. But that like picture of him with his eyes wide open, it's just absolutely hilarious. Like, he nailed that scene.
I love the scene where they're going to kidnap Teresa, the dancer, and they're like running away with her, and it's like, this guy seems more than willing to do this. It's a bizarre scene, and it's very funny.
By the end of this, our theory is going to be that he is a sociopath.
I don't know. Where do you come down on this, Lachlan?
Well, I was going to add, if that sociopath thing, he could be the original Walter White. You know, going from a very hapless kind of, you know, let's say harmless individual, and then turning into a cold-blooded killer by the end.
But it was always there the whole time. It just didn't have a chance to come out
Yeah.
until now.
He is the one
Yeah.
who knocks.
Simmering under the surface.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying to think about the from the book, just if there was more kind of urgency or like stress in him, you know, realizing he's out of his depth or realizing everything's going pear-shaped. But yeah, I can't. It's been a few years since I've read it. I've reread it a few times. But I wonder if it's maybe just his that instruction from Carol Reed, perhaps telling him just not to act, and then that's kind of subdued, you know, his performance. Whereas maybe we're supposed to believe internally he's, you know, stressing out and worrying about what's happening.
I still think it's such a bizarre note. Hey, actor, don't
Yeah.
act. Hey, fireman, don't put out that fire. Like, okay.
It almost feels a little bit like the Stanley Kubrick, like make them do the lines like 100 times to the point where the lines stop having any meaning and they stop trying to put like real accents on it or anything like that, and you just get a kind of almost like built-in organic delivery.
Oh, that's why we spend hours recording these now.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, I get it. But let's get into the likes. We haven't really like tackled that as a particular section. Lachlan, I want to go to you first. Something you've honed in on you really, really like about the film.
I think first of all, the fact it was filmed in Cuba, I think that kind of the cinematography of Havana, beautiful city, and also, you know, so that's picked up, but also that era, I think the 50s, you know, the scenes when they go to like the Tropicana Club and they're in kind of a casino or restaurants and everyone's kind of dressed up and they're drinking, you know, the cocktails of the day, and they have the whiskey with the soda in the kind of squirty soda machine thing. I'm not sure what that's called, but I think it really captures that style in the dress and the drinks, and I also just love I kind of like the setup of just the comedic setup of somebody who doesn't know what they're doing and is doing this, very kind of serious espionage work, and just kind of, almost pulling the wool over the eyes of people that are supposed to be smarter than him.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like that aspect as well.
I can understand how, like, maybe British censors at the time weren't thrilled with the depiction of British intelligence, because I love the scenes where they're sitting there staring at, like, the the artwork of the vacuum, and they're, as a facility, and they're just like, yep. This, and
Yes.
the fact that it's all revealed, and they're just like, yep, we're just gonna let this go. Sure, okay, moving on.
And there's a good look on Noël Cowell's face when they say that as well. I'm not sure if you noticed that when they kind of say, "Oh, it looks like a vacuum cleaner," and Noël Cowell's in the background, and he knows the man's a vacuum cleaner salesman, and he kind of has this look like, "Oh my God, the guy's just sending vacuum cleaner pictures," and I think that's when just that look on his face, he shows that he knows what's really happening.
But it really ends with that whole, like, let's just sweep this one under the rug and call it a day and give him a teaching position.
I just want to shout out
Yes.
as well. You mentioned the cinematography, and I think shooting in Cuba was great. The cinematographer for this is Mr. Oswald Morris. The name might not jump out to you, but his filmography certainly will. And I'll read you some of his films, including the likes of The Guns of Navarone, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, Oliver, Scrooge, The Macintosh Man, The Odessa File, and The Man with the Golden Gun.
Yeah, he also did actually a 1965 Sean Connery film called The Hill that's really good and really beautiful looking black and white film.
There you go. A man to go to if you want some good cinematography in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, apparently.
Or good puppet movies, because he did Dark Crystal and The Great Muppet Caper.
Yes, he did. Great shout. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, I mean, just speaking to the sort of the look of the film, and also, I'll tag on the soundtrack as well. I think the score for this is really great. But yeah, just you feel like you're in, and you were in Havana. But he has this way of capturing like the seediness, but the life of the city at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Like it feels grimy, but it also feels like somewhere you really enjoy being.
Yeah, it does. It has that travelogue feel, but it also kind of underlines that kind of hotbed of, sultry espionage going on, and you feel it in like every frame outside of the country club, which has its own distinct vibe.
Yeah, I do know there's a lot of like Dutch angles appearing in this and off kilter stuff, which I could take or leave. But yeah, I just think very well put together.
Yeah, it's a beautiful production for sure. Yeah.
Cam, what about you? Something you liked?
I thought the supporting cast in this was fantastic. I thought Burl Ives as the doctor, his friend, who is ultimately like winds up dead because of his friend's lies. I thought like this was a really fascinating, tragic character that could have like headlined his own film, because there's so much there that's just left unsaid about this character's history. And Burl Ives is an actor who I think to many he's probably best known as Sam the Snowman in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the stop motion animated film that's like a perennial favorite. But like I know his voice instantly every time I hear it. And to me, like he was a joy here. And Maureen O'Hara is like just a big star in this time period. And I thought she was absolutely delightful as the secretary character. It's just like she manages to convince me that Alec Guinness is attractive. Like, and I don't mean physically, I mean his character. Like that there is an electricity between them, and that is coming from her. It's coming through the way she manages to convey that this man has this like kind of attractiveness as he's especially becoming more and more of this espionage figure. I thought she did a great job there. And then also Ernie Kovacs as the chief of police. The scene where him and Guinness play like alcohol checkers, I thought was unbelievable. Like that to me is a scene that I've never seen before, and I'll never forget it. It was, I just thought, incredible. And I feel like there's a kind of an in-joke going here that so often when we talk about espionage, they talk about chess.
Yeah.
And the fact we're using checkers here feels like kind of a underlining of the comedic nature of what they're doing.
Like it's a step down. Like it's an easier game.
Yeah, yeah. It's not a mastermind chess game. It's like kids play checkers, right?
Even dum-dums like us.
Exactly. That's all Scott and I do when we're on vacation.
And it's a drinking game as well.
Well, yeah, we're like the most boring versions of that. We wouldn't take any of each other's pieces because neither of us particularly drink, so it'd just be a stalemate every time.
Hmm. Yeah.
What a waste of good alcohol. No, I think that's great. I mean, I think of all the people in this film, I would point out from the secondary cast, if you will, it was the police chief played by Ernie Kovacs as Captain Segura. I just think like he is clearly the villain of the film, but at the same time, you do kind of get where he's coming from. Like, he's not just a one-note villain. He is just a guy doing a job in a country that is in a bit of an odd place, and he loves a woman who happens to be with Alec Guinness, Alec Guinness's daughter. I completely get where he's coming from, and he's just sort of used by the end. And when he gets sort of messed over by Alec Guinness, he just goes, "Do you know what? I'm just going to deport you."
Yeah, but I like that he gives him the 2 bullets
Yeah,
at the end because it's like he could have arrested him.
he knows.
He
knew.
knows, and he could have arrested him. But the fact that he's like, just get the hell out, and gives him that kind of knowing, like, I was on to you.
Yeah,
And I may have been the only one who knew specifically what was going on.
yeah. It's a nice touch. That final scene there. Well, one of the final scenes is definitely great. A lot of what I like has already been tackled. Being in Havana, the soundtrack, some of the secondary actors. I'll just take a little bit more time to talk about Alec Guinness for a second. I think as a lead, he is perfectly cast in this film. I would have liked to have seen perhaps a slightly more comedic take on this character, but maybe how he's playing it is the way it should have been played. I just feel like that sort of haplessness makes us think he might be a sociopath, but in another world, you might feel that the temperature's being turned up on him a little bit. I don't know if you necessarily feel that, but he still does a great job of making you laugh and make you sort of care about him as a character and what he's going through.
I like that we have to read the character, that it's not all on the surface. And I think if we go more overtly comedic and have him panicking, whatever, that's the movie telling us precisely what this character's going through in his head. And maybe that is in some ways more frustrating for some viewers when they watch the film, but to me that was what drew me in more.
Yeah, for sure. I think the only other like I wanted to shout out was the confab between Alec Guinness and Noel Coward in the toilet.
I mean, anytime they were having awkward bathroom meetings was hilarious.
It was actually pointed out to us online by David Lobregelis, License to Quit, that Alec Guinness was arrested before this film was put together for cottaging, which is basically, I think, soliciting in a bathroom, I think it was, to another man.
Really?
So it's interesting. Yeah, so I think Alec Guinness was, from what I've been told, it's just from my source, I haven't done any more research than that Alec Guinness was a bisexual man. So it's interesting that he actually took on this role when he had been arrested for doing this very thing.
Wow. Yeah, because like a lot of actors, if they wind up in a circumstance where they are publicly, called out for something in their own personal lives.
Well, this is it. Apparently he gave a different name.
Okay, but like
that's why he wasn't connected to it till later.
Oh, I get you. Because a lot of times, if you do wind up in a situation like that, you're overly safe in your upcoming career choices, so you're not reminding audiences of that. But if he was not at the time known for that, then that makes a little more sense.
Yeah, but just quite a brave thing in many ways to do.
Yeah, yeah, wow.
Yeah. And also an utterly hilarious scene where, Noel Coward just sort of ushers him politely into a stool whilst he fundles around with the other guy. Like, I thought this film was going in a highly comedic route when that scene started. It didn't really go that way later. But, like, the Noel Coward of all of this, it's interesting that Cam, you didn't mention Noel Coward as one of your favorite background actors. We'll maybe come back to that.
Oh, he's good. He's good. I just think when I'm looking at, like, Ernie Kovacs or Maureen O'Hara or Burl Ives, they jump out more.
Sure. No, I completely agree. I just love that sort of the complete farce of that scene. Like, If I'm actually, to be fair, if I'm having any spy meetings in the future, Cam, let's do it in a toilet.
I mean, to me, like the whole nature of like country club espionage, where you're like trying to like talk these guys into like having these meetings in the bathrooms, that is just like funny unto itself.
Well, let me ask the man who may or may not be a spy in this podcast conversation, Lachlan, where would you host your spy conversations, if you were to have them?
Well, I was just going to quickly add with that bathroom scene. I like that later when he has to recruit the spy, that is the Alec Guinness character has to recruit the pilot. He actually does the same thing, and he's like, "Oh, this must be how spies do things. You tell someone, meet me in the bathroom," and so he kind of repeats it with the pilot trying to do the same thing. Where would I record it? I would probably do it on a long walk around a lake. Somewhere very secluded, or perhaps on a park bench. That might be a bit too obvious. But yeah, I think a long walk on a lake, near a lake, or in a forest, perhaps that might be a good place, away from prying eyes and ears.
And the great thing about a lot of lakes and a lot of walks around lakes is they often have public restrooms nearby. So if it fails, you could just take it to the toilet.
Or perhaps next to a waterfall, because the running water. That's the idea, that the running water, dulls out the sound. So
Yeah.
perhaps next to, maybe Niagara Falls.
Oh,
In Canada, there, Cam. You
Yeah.
could, that could be a good place.
I'd push him over the side.
it'd be like Superman 2.
Yeah. Throw you in the barrel.
Yeah.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Red alert, spy hards. We are shaking things up over on the Patreon page.
That's right, we are launching an exclusive new show where we tackle the exploits of the small screen's greatest secret agents, like Jack Bauer, George Smiley, and beyond.
And don't forget, every month you also get 2 Agents in the Field episodes where we decode the adventures of your favorite spy actors in their biggest non-spy movies. But Cam, tell the people what we have coming up next.
It's catch-up time, and this was a month celebrating all of the greats, because we were talking about Roman Holiday, the 1950s classic rom-com with Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn. We talked about Michael Mann's Collateral with Tom Cruise, plus Slow Horses Season 2. Folks, you don't want to miss this rodeo.
So strap on your Condor Man wings and soar into the future with us over at patreon.com/spyhards.
But before Big O zaps us with a red pulsating laser, let's get back to the spy jinx.
All right, let's get to dislikes, some of our criticisms of the film. This daiquiri is slowly getting empty as I sip upon it. Lachlan, over to you. Is there something you'd like to talk about the film, a dislike you have?
A little bit hard for me, because I love the book, love the concept, but I think I guess like we mentioned, it is very slow in parts. This is not your kind of action spy film. And so there's not a lot of the, it's not a Bond film where you have a lot of those action scenes, or, lots of use of weapons and things like that. So I think that's probably one part. That's probably it, I think. I think it is just a bit slow. That's probably the only thing for me that I dislike. Because, yeah, everything else that we've mentioned, the filming in Cuba, the style, the acting, I enjoyed it. Although now that you mention about the stakes, yeah, perhaps the stakes weren't that high for Wormold, and he could have just kind of given it up, and they just wouldn't have had money, and that would have been the end of it. His daughter wouldn't have got the horse.
Yeah, when you spell it out that way, like it isn't like a highly politically charged film, is it? Particularly, this is low stakes as it comes.
Yeah, there's no kind of like secret, document, or there's no like nuclear device that has to be tamed. So yeah, but yeah, I'd probably just say that it's not an action film. It is slow in parts, and that's probably something that for other spy fans that might not be, compared to other spy films, might not be something that engages them.
Well, it is a genuine barrier to entry, I would say. Like a lot of people who listen to this show, and Cam and I see it in the downloads. Like, different types of films get different audiences to tune in for, and some of these slow burning, I don't want to say Le Carré-esque, but in that sort of realm, darker, more true to life spy stories can really push people away. They're not as inviting as a bombastic James Bond or a Mission Impossible film. So yeah, it is in many ways to some people a downside.
Well, it makes sense to me why, it wasn't maybe at the time given like a proper DVD release in the 2000s and how it became a little more of a cult film because it feels like a cult film.
Yeah.
When I'm looking at spy movies, a lot of the ones you named, Scott, are why the genre is popular. Jason Bourne, another example. Like, they're very inviting to anyone who wants to watch them. Whereas I think this one, there's the tone of it, the very measured pace, and sort of the, I mean, it's convoluted in a way where it's kind of like spinning your head for fun. Because it's introducing all these complications, the person that dies, who has the same name as the character he's created, all of that sort of thing is asking you to suddenly try to connect dots that don't exist. And so the filmmaker's having fun playing around with the audience because at this point, the audience is well trained in terms of how to follow these types of plots, especially even in like film noir, which aren't obviously spy films, but they're very convoluted. And so it's like a game kind of on the part of the filmmaker. And I think if you're on board for it, you have a lot of fun with it. But I can see a lot of people being very frustrated.
Yeah, I don't know if this is what people like to call a 4-quadrant film.
No, and that was the case with Burn After Reading as well. Like, if you're in on the joke...
Yeah, and nor should it be, by the way. Like, it's not. I'm not saying this is necessarily a failure of a film because it doesn't appeal to everyone.
No. But I think, like, when it kind of plays like Burn After Reading. And Burn After Reading is one where, like, if you're in on the joke, it's really funny. If you find it obnoxious, as I did the first time I saw the movie, then it's really grating.
Yeah, that's still my experience of Burn After Reading. I do not like that sort of just FU to the audience. But that's another story for another podcast. Cam, a dislike from you?
I think the only thing that really jumps out, because, like, I agree, it is pretty measured in its pace, which I watched it at the right time of day. I was feeling full of life, and I really enjoyed the experience. If I'd watched this at 10 o'clock at night, where I was maybe a little tired, it would not have played. It would have been much more frustrating to watch.
Yeah.
So I do think it is a little bit dependent on the circumstances in which you watch it. I thought, like, the performance by Joe Morrow of the daughter, I don't know that I would say there's an issue with the performance, but the way they write the character is a little dippy. And also, like, the age of the character was very confusing to me because initially I'm like making a note is the daughter like 28 years old? And then I actually looked up the actress and she was, I think, 19 at the time. It's just that people looked a lot older at the time than they do nowadays. Like a 19-year-old now looks like they're, 14. But like, the way they kind of infantilize that character was a little confusing to me because you have the chief of police trying to woo her, and I could never get a good read on exactly how old she was.
I actually, now you think of it, I took her to be like towards the end of school, but then that would still make her like 17.
I guess so, which would make sense.
Super creepy for the police captain, by the way.
Oh, it is creepy. It's 100% creepy. But like, there's scenes of her at the school where she towers over everyone else in the class.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because she is in school. It's like a religious
convent school.
Yeah. Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
That's added a whole level of ick there.
Yeah, there is a creepy element to that.
Yeah, a little bit. But like, she's sort of dressed as quite a young girl.
But then also talking about how she's like wearing indiscreet, this perfume.
Yeah.
Because that's like kind of her running joke is like, I'm wearing indiscreet. Can you smell it?
And sets men on fire.
Yeah.
Nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Yeah.
Graham Greene, you dirty dog.
I don't have an issue with like that kind of being an element of the movie. It's more that I just didn't understand it.
End your sentence there, Cam. We can cancel you right now. I don't have an issue with age.
It was more that I just didn't understand the specifics they were trying to communicate.
Oh, yeah. That's fair. I already mentioned most of my dislikes at the front. What I will just add is I know you just sort of credit Bert Ives and Maureen and Morrow, their performances. I actually felt like we didn't get enough of them, especially the Bert Ives character. Like, there was something going on with him that we didn't really get to see all of it. And sometimes it is nice just to have things hinted towards and not have it all explained, and that's good. But like, there was something going on behind the scenes with him that is never really spelled out.
Right.
And I feel like there could have been not an explanation, but more of an exploration.
Right, because they mention he's German. The character is German,
Mm-hmm.
and left Germany pre-World War II. But there's always that kind of persecution element that he feels that like he's always under suspicion because he is German, and the time and place that this is happening. And you could have like dived into a lot more there.
Yeah. I mean, and he sits around in his like German military uniform and stuff like that.
Yeah, from World War One. Yeah.
Yeah, like why? Dive into that.
Yeah. Even based on the book, I think, one thing that happens is it's never really clear, like who is doing all of this, who's behind the scenes. Like, for example, there's the man Carter who's on the plane, and we never really know who he is or what he's doing or who he's working for. So it's kind of really left out in the open, even in the book. So I think the movie is no different to that, which is a little bit disappointing, or it lacks that kind of element of what's the end game of who's actually pulling the strings behind the scenes here, or who's killing the pilot, or doing these other acts. So it's a little bit up in the air with that plot point.
Yeah, and you get the sense that like the Burl Ives character is someone who carries a lot of pathos and has been pulled into this espionage web created by the Alec Guinness character and has done things when he was pulled into it. Like, because he's wearing the German uniform because he's implying he's done things that a soldier would do at that point.
Yeah.
So I think he is related now to what is going on with the competing vacuum cleaner salesman. It's just that it's kind of like I said earlier, it makes it quite complex to try to track what's going on, but that's also the joke of the movie. But that doesn't mean that the other characters don't react to what they're going through emotionally, unlike Alec Guinness.
And I will also just add, because I mentioned some dislikes earlier, I'll mention a like now. One thing I actually quite like about the film, and Cam mentioned the opposing vacuum cleaner salesman, is he turns out to be an enemy agent later on in the film, but the film gives you the information to figure that out ahead of time by hearing him stutter on the phone.
Yeah.
And then kind of mentioning the stutter, and then having that guy stutter. That's all it does. It doesn't point anything else out to you. And then Alec Guinness eventually puts it all together. But the audience can put it together ahead of time, and I like that addition.
It's a very Hitchcockian scene, too, where you have the drink, and he's giving the toast, and we know it's poisoned, and you're waiting to see how it's going to play out. And I love, this kind of reminded me of the Humphrey Bogart film, All Through the Night.
Yeah.
Where they had like this really adorable dog that they sent on a boat that then got blown up. And here they have like the most adorable dog that's just sitting on the ground. You're getting shots of it. And ultimately that's where the poison winds up.
You also see the dog limping away on one leg. I have to wonder how they managed to pull that off.
It was 1959 and I'm not asking questions.
Okay.
Okay, moving on.
Over to final notes. I have a couple of little notes. Lachlan, do you have anything left you'd like to mention about the film?
I don't think so. I mean, the only thing probably, maybe just one interesting thing. I think Cam touched on this quite a bit about just those the scenes that Castro and the new regime in Cuba kind of imposed, and there's a balcony scene where everyone cheers at the Maureen O'Hara character for having sprayed Captain Segura, and everyone's kind of cheering in the street.
Yeah.
I read that that was one of a scene that they kind of the Cuban government, the new Cuban government, wanted them to include, as well as some of the scenes where kind of the protesters are getting arrested in the street. And even that opening scene with Dr. Hasselbacher where, the police come up to him and ask him for his papers, and he kind of refuses and said, "No, who are you to ask me that?" And then he sees Captain Segura and he takes it out straight away. And those were all trying to show that the Cuba before, the revolutionary Cuba, was, very authoritarian and was kind of a police state almost. And so that's probably, something interesting to look out for as a little final note.
Well, if you're looking for things that are interesting to look out for, I can add a couple. These are my final notes. Two things to look out for. Firstly, when you see Alec Guinness's daughter saddle up her horse, she puts the saddle on backwards.
I don't understand this character.
She's clearly not a fan of horse hards.
No, clearly not.
And later in the film, you see a comic strip in the film which inspires Alec Guinness in one of his little lies he tells the Secret Services. It's called Rock Kent. And you see a plane crash and explode.
Yep.
And it's credited to Sid Cain, who actually was one of the film's assistant art directors. But Sid Cain is a name that's quite infamous in sort of spy movies, and specifically Bond, because he actually worked on a bunch of films, including Billion Dollar Brain, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Live and Let Die, all the way through to GoldenEye, I think, as well. Who Dares Wins. He's got a lot of spy movies. The Sea Wolves, The Wild Geese. A lot of credits to his name, that Sid Cain.
Yeah, and From Russia with Love, I believe, too.
There you go. So yeah, look out for a very young Sid Cain mentioned in this film.
Yeah, that one jumped out to me, too. As soon as I saw the name, it was like, why do I know that name? There's a connection there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that actually was pointed out to us online by Bill Koenig as well when I was talking about this the other day. So shout out to Bill and Cam. Any notes for us?
I think, just two.
Okay.
There's a scene where Alec Guinness scales a wall. It looked very impressive. He was much more athletic than I really think of when I think of Alec Guinness.
Yeah, he did. That's people were just stronger back then. Could you scale a wall right now, Cam?
Yeah. To me, the only issue would be I just don't like heights, so that might stop me. But in terms of being able to actually climb a wall, yeah, I think so.
Okay, look at you.
That's right.
Look at you.
Look at me.
You virile man. You're a real Alec Guinness.
And the other thing I noted was they're taking their code from this book called Lamb's Tales from Shakespeare, which had me completely baffled as to what that was. And so I looked it up. It was actually a children's book where they basically transposed Shakespearean texts for kids.
Oh.
And they would try to keep as much of the actual Shakespearean, text in place, but conveyed in a way that kids could understand.
So how did they make Romeo and Juliet work for kids, or Titus Andronicus?
They're not doing Titus Andronicus. I think Romeo and Juliet. Well, here's the question: are they actually doing any of the tragedies, or are they just doing the comedies?
Probably more the comedies.
Although they're pretty adult in their themes, a lot of the comedies. But
I think you just changed like the ending for Romeo and Juliet. They lived happily ever after.
Sure, that really keeps the core element of the play.
The themes
going.
are
the themes
going strong there. Yeah,
maybe like Taming of the Shrew would fit in well there.
Midsummer Night's Dream, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good one. But I thought that was interesting because I just think that book is entirely lost to time. It meant nothing to me when I saw it, other than
right.
I was confused because they kept referring to Lamb's Tales, and that's not a Shakespearean play.
I actually asked my wife Hannah, who's a bit of a Shakespeare buff herself, and she'd never seen it.
Yeah, I googled it. Yeah.
Does it still exist? Can you still get a copy?
You'll find out on your birthday.
Okay. Can't wait to unwrap some the child version of Romeo and Juliet.
That's about where you are. You got to build up to the adult stuff, right?
Oh, I took you to the Globe and then almost fell asleep. So that does track.
That's right.
I just wanted to add as well. It was nice to see a spy that's also an illustrator. I'm getting Condor Man flashbacks there.
Yeah, good call. I wonder if there's any other spies who are really talented. Oh, Ethan Hunt in Ghost Protocol, which we I can't remember if we've covered it in the past or coming up. It's around the time of recording this, but there's a point where he draws someone on his hand and shows it.
Okay, so we have to start a Hall of Fame of best spy illustrators.
Yeah. Okay. And if we have like a real I don't know, maybe Captain America 2 counts because Captain America is known to be a very good artist as well.
Is he?
Yeah. In the first movie, he draws like a monkey performing, and it's very good.
Can I include Mark Rylance in that as well from Bridge of Spies?
You may. That one is allowed as well.
Yeah, look at us. A real Hall of Fame. That's a Mount Rushmore. Currently, there's 4 of them. Let's see if we can add some more over the years. I'll keep an eye on that one. Anything else for us, Cam?
No, that about wraps up my special notes.
Well, the daiquiris run out. It's time to ask the main question. Is Our Man in Havana making the list of the best spy movies of all time? I'm sure you have your answers at home, but it's down to us to make the call. Lachlan, you're our guest. You get the first vote. Our Man in Havana, yes or no?
I'm going to say it's very difficult for me to say. I think if it were the book, but it's not, the book would make, a top 10 list, I think, in terms of the influence it had. But I think the film might just miss out, even though, it's probably my personal favorite and it's definitely in my top 5 spy films. But I think, yeah, maybe overall, over the canon of spy films, I think it might just miss out.
I love your objectivity
Mm.
and your honesty, because we've had people that come on here before that have been like, this is my favorite film. I know it's flawed, but it's going on the knock list anyway, and fought tooth and nail. But you're like, I know it's flawed. I love it, but I know it's got problems. I love that. It's a no. Cam, what about you?
I am kind of in a similar camp. I really enjoyed this movie, but it's like I said, it felt when I was done that it was more of like a cult film to a degree. Like, it's not as inviting. And I think if I were to create a list of spy films that I can give to anyone, they have to feel accessible in some way. They can be dense or dark or moody or whatever. Like, they can kind of run the gamut in terms of tones and styles. But this one, to me, I feel like is almost a little too idiosyncratic for most people. But that doesn't mean it's not good. I think some people will find this movie very intriguing, and I think others will find it very frustrating.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And one thing that stuck in my mind since doing my research for this, and you mentioned it in the behind the scenes cam, is I really do wonder what Hitchcock would have done with this.
He would have really changed it, I think. He would have stripped a lot of the novel material out, because that's typically what he did when he made adaptations. He didn't stick too close. Although the Psycho book to film is fairly close. But yeah, I just, this movie does not have Hitchcock's sense of humor.
No.
And that is a very specific tone, and you would have seen that conveyed much stronger in this movie. And you probably would have had like Cary Grant or Jimmy Stewart starring in it.
Yeah, I could definitely see one of those two in this, in sort of the wrong man in the wrong place style story.
Yeah.
Because this is only like a year or two removed from North by Northwest, right?
It would have been the same. It was the same year as North by Northwest, and I think you would have seen Hitchcock also amp up the tension and the suspense of the character digging himself deeper and deeper.
There would have been a sense of the walls coming in on him more,
which I don't know benefits the film. Like, I think this film is interesting because it doesn't have that element.
Yeah, there's a breezier nature to this version,
but also a more complex one, because we just never really have a full-on grasp of the lead character.
Well, I mean, I'll get to my vote in a second, but I think this will stand as an interesting curio in the spy movie canon. Not necessarily a need to see, which also gives you my answer, which would be no. Maybe a little less labor than the two of you, but I think there's a lot of good in here, a lot to watch, but I'm not sure I would put it on the list of like, you need to watch these films. Maybe this is like the further reading section in your bibliography.
I would say people that are like real, diehard spy fans who haven't seen this movie should watch it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're following along every week, obviously you're watching it with us anyway. But if you're like waiting to hear if we maybe recommend it, I'd say yes, it's probably worth your time tracking down. But mostly because it's free on YouTube.
Sure. I wish I'd known that.
Well, there you go, folks. 3 no's, and as such, Our Man in Havana is not making the knock list. The dossier on the film is complete and filed as classified. But before we close out the show, Lachlan, I want to throw it over to you to firstly thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us about a film you're super passionate about. It clearly showed that you love this film. But I want to let the people know where they can hear more from you and hear more about your books, and just tell us a little bit more about your books.
Oh yeah, thanks, Karen Scott, for having me on. So my website, or my full name, is Lachlan Page, and you can find me at lachlanpageauthor.com, and Lachlan spelled Lachlan, and the Page is just Page. I've got two novels, Magical Disinformation, which, spoiler alert, it's a little bit similar to the theme of Our Man in Havana in terms of the plot devices. It's set in Colombia. And another novel is The General of Caracas. And I have a novella called The Smuggler's Apprentice of Guatemala, which is actually a free ebook novella on Amazon. So you can buy it online at any of the bookstores you usually do. And they're available there. And yeah, my website, like I mentioned, lachlanpageauthor.com.
Well, we'll have links to all of that in the show notes below so everyone can click down there and go straight to picking up a copy. But I'll ask you the question. Where would you recommend people start when it comes to your books and literature?
I think if you probably get the first book, Magical Disinformation, that's probably a good place to start. Although, the novella, Smuggler's Apprentice of Guatemala, is free ebook. So, that's another good place to start as well. And it is a bit of a series, but they can all be read as standalone. So
okay.
I guess, Magical Disinformation is probably the first one. And Smuggler's Apprentice of Guatemala is the kind of the prequel, I guess, to that series.
And on the social medias, where can people find you there?
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, or X as it's now known, and Facebook. My handle is @Don Lachlan. So Don, Lachlan.
You're a smart man.
There's a Latin American vibe going there.
You've locked down your branding like we did too. I appreciate that.
That's right.
Well, you are definitely our man in Sydney today, and I thank you for taking the time to speak with us, Lachlan. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much. My pleasure too.
There you go, folks. That was our chat about Our Man in Havana. A big film you've been wanting to tackle for a while. I hope we did it justice. 2 Carol Reeds in the space of a month ain't bad.
Yeah, and also just something to appreciate about Carol Reed, the different tones he brings. Because, the third man has more of an ominous, dark tone, whereas, like, Our Man in Havana is often very funny. Like, it's a very wry look at the world of espionage. And it was a lot of fun to discover because this was a movie, as I said, I had not seen before. And while it didn't make the knock list quite, it's a movie that I think I'm probably going to be going back to in the future.
And, of course, I want to thank Lachlan for jumping on the show and talking about the film with us, too. If you want to find out more about him and his books, there are links in the show notes below. But moving on from Our Man in Havana, Cam, what are we looking at next week?
Well, we're jumping from one well-known filmmaker, Carol Reed, to another. We are going to tackle John Huston, who we previously discussed in the past when we tackled the Macintosh Man.
Oh, yeah.
We are going to look at the 1970 espionage drama, The Kremlin Letter.
Another one I haven't seen, but I'm going to sit myself down and write myself a letter with kisses on the bottom. Kremlin Letter. That'll be an interesting one. We recently looked at Mission Impossible 4, and there's some Kremlin scenes there too, so we're keeping it Russia for a little while.
Yeah, and a big ensemble cast, and of course, Nigel Green, who played Dalby in the Ipcris file. I can't wait to dive into this one.
I don't know anything about this film, actually. It's another one that I've had mentioned to us before on like Facebook and Twitter from time to time. But yeah, no connective tissue to it. The last sort of other film in Russia I think we looked at was The Russia House, which was, I think I had a really good time with that one.
Yeah, and I think that Kremlin Letter will really complement Our Man in Havana very well. And that there is kind of this, I think, similar tones going on. And I think anyone who enjoyed Our Man in Havana, this week with us, may want to check out the Kremlin Letter because I think they may see some things that they also appreciate.
Well, consider this your mission statement. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to check out the Kremlin Letter and join us next week as we dive into its details and history. Thank you all for joining us here on Spy Hard's podcast. If you're considering becoming a Patreon or you want to help support the show in any way you can, join us over on patreon.com/spyhards. There's a link in the show notes below as well. Over 100 bonus episodes at this point for a low price. And really, even if you're not going to listen to the episodes, it's just nice for you to show your support if you can. Do not put yourself out for us at all. But if you have the spare change, you want to just drop by for a couple of months and join the Patreon, we'd love to have you. Great community over there and some very good episodes to listen to too. And we also cover Spy TV on there. People always ask us, when are we going to tackle Spy television shows? Well, we do it on the Patreon, folks. If you want to hear us talk about some great Spy TV and some not so great Spy TV, you can see more and hear more over there. And if you don't already, make sure you follow us discreetly on social media at Spyhards. That's SPYHARDS on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, folks, Cam and I are off to Cuba for a daiquiri.